If you ask the average person to reach their hand back so that it goes beyond their back, what will happen is they will immediately allow their upper arm to go backwards in space with their hand. This is understandable. If the hand is to go back, why shouldn't the entire arm? But when you move your upper arm back like this, you are shortening your arm. You are moving your shoulder blade in towards the spine. You are retracting your arm. So the question is it possible to move your hand behind your back without shortening? This is a procedure we can call the Superman gesture, as it brings to mind the pose Superman made when he took off into flight. This procedure can cause a serious feeling of stretch in the shoulder and could be painful for some people. Not painful in the sense of a damaging pain, but like how a good massage can be painful. You will be engaging the muscles of your arm in a way that is unfamiliar. You will be lengthening the arm. There are many things to consider with a gesture like this. First off, you don't want to lift the shoulder or elbow as you do this. You are trying to keep your arm extended, and you are swinging the arm backwards in space. Your hand will go up in space a little, but make sure you're not lifting the hand or elbow. The end is to have it so that if someone was looking at you from the side, your hand would be back relative to your pelvis. But you don't want the hand to actually go in line with the back. Your hand should be outside of your thigh when you start, and outside of your pelvis at the end. There is one thing to remember here, though, that is much more important than the end you're trying to achieve, and that is the means whereby you will achieve it. We must have our torso in decent shape for this procedure to have any value. We can't have our pelvis forward, our back shortened and bent, and get anything out of practicing this Superman gesture. This procedure lengthens your latissimus dorsi. If your pelvis is tipped forward, you will be missing out on a huge portion of the lengthening, to the point that you will not really be benefiting. But as long as you have a little bit of efficiency in rotating your pelvis back and up, while not letting your upper sternum go back, you can benefit from this procedure. One thing we can use to help us get started with this procedure is to hold a yardstick horizontally in both hands, with the palms facing up and the thumbs on top. Bring the stick to touch both of your upper arm spots, making sure that you move your elbows in front of your frontal plane when you do this. Don't let your elbows stay behind your body. This will help you get your upper arm forward to begin with. You can keep the stick there with one hand and do the Superman procedure with your other arm. You will immediately know when you're pulling the upper arm back because it will leave the stick. And do make sure you're on the upper arm spots and not too high. However, I must once again remind you that everything I just mentioned will be pointless if you let your pelvis and lower ribs spill forward and thereby shorten and narrow your back. The end of getting your arm back into the Superman pose cannot supersede the means whereby. This brings me back to the directions we looked at for the hands last episode. We looked at the idea of having the backs of the hands facing forward. But having the backs of the hands face forward without getting the tip of the elbow forward, out, and down, or without lengthening and widening the back, is of no interest to us. We shouldn't confuse a description of the conditions that are the result of proper coordination with the means by which we will get to those conditions. In order for your hand to be widened with the back facing forward, you can't just move the hand. You have to correct your torso and arms. That is the only way it will be sustainable. Now let's look at some simple ways that we can help ourselves fight our old irrational habits. In the first episode of this series, we looked at how people often put their arms behind their back. This is not a posture I recommend because it retracts the arms. If we look at this picture of F.M. Alexander, we see him posed with his arms folded across his chest. While this posture is not ideal for every situation, this is a quick way you can make sure your elbows are forward of your ribs. While your arms are there, you can gently push your lower sternum back while keeping your upper sternum forward. And no one around you would even really notice, but you could easily adjust yourself quite significantly into a better configuration. One thing to consider about this posture is that you want your upper arm spot to be above your elbow when you do this, and not have your upper arm angled backwards. You want your upper arm to be vertically straight. We can also think back to an idea we looked at before. If our arms are out in front of us, having that weight forward will make it easier for us to get the ribs at the back of the armpit, the lower sternum, the lower ribs, and the iliacs back. In your day-to-day life, if you've found yourself falling into your habitual posture, you can consider moving your arms forward of your body like you're reaching out for something. If you direct your upper arm spots and the tips of your elbows forward, out, and down while you do that, and direct the ribs at the back of the armpit back and up, you can completely reconfigure your rib cage. So the next time you pull out your phone, instead of letting that push you into a habitual slumped posture, you could use that gesture of holding something out in front of you to help you get the ribs at the back of the armpit back. Then you will be improving your posture while doing something that formerly would have wreaked havoc on your posture. And here is where I want to emphasize something. Though you can take lessons in the initial Alexander technique to help in improving your skill, it is not a system that's primarily about the interaction between a teacher and a pupil. The initial Alexander technique is a system that you use yourself. It's something you put into practice all day long. The way to do that is to use the strategies and concepts that you've learned in your day-to-day life. As I spoke about just a moment ago, when you pull out your phone, you can give yourself the direction to pull the elbow forward, out, and down, and the upper arm spot forward, out, and down while you do that. You can give yourself the direction to keep your lower ribs back and to not allow them to spill forward. Some people are at first off-put by this. They don't want to have to think about what they're doing. They just want to know when they will automatically have good posture. But that way of thinking has two problems. First, you simply will not improve your posture if you're not thinking as you act. The lack of thinking is the problem. We have all built up habits based on what feels comfortable and normal, and those habits are very strong. The only way to defeat your habits is with your conscious mind, which is actually quite capable of overcoming and outsmarting your habits. Which brings me to the second problem. Most people don't realize they can, fairly easily, think about their movements. This is understandable. Most people run almost entirely on their feeling sense, and have never spent any significant time consciously coordinating their movements. So at first, it seems quite daunting to think about 2 or 3 or 4 movements at once. But I've had many students who, by their second lesson, are capable of coordinating 3 or more movements. It's a somewhat astonishing thing to see. I list off 3 directions rather quickly, and the person hears them, remembers them, and puts them into action. Then I add another and another. And with a little help, someone who previously couldn't imagine coordinating 5 movements together is doing it with relative ease. It might seem like a burden to have to think about how you use your elbow as you hold up your phone, but it really requires only a quick little thought. It's actually kind of funny that we imagine that it's such a pain to have to give the slightest thought to how we're moving our body. We've gotten by for so long purely on feeling, without a thought at all, that we believe we should be able to say, carry a heavy bag while walking, without giving a single thought to how we want to coordinate the many movements involved in that rather complex act. Of course, that delusion doesn't last forever. The reason so many people want to correct their posture is because not only do many of them have serious pains and other health concerns, but it becomes clear to most people that they have terrible posture that makes them feel run down and makes everyday actions uncomfortable and annoying. The non-thinking method works in the sense that you can still have a life, but you suffer the consequences. The way to avoid these undesirable consequences is to start using your beautiful conscious mind. And remember, the human mind is capable of thinking of multiple things at once, but it's a skill like any other. You have to work at it. However, as I said, quite quickly you can learn to consciously coordinate an array of different movements, and before long, it will not feel like a chore. It will just seem sensible. You can think in activity. You can think about what you're doing, and in doing so, you can change your posture for the better. You should by now have a decent idea of how we want to orient our arms relative to our torso. Having clarity on that is important if you want to practically implement change. Could you give a short explanation of the problems that people have in their arms? Could you describe what movements will combat those problems? Get your mind going, think it over, and then join me next episode, and we'll tie together what we've learned about the arms so far and give ourselves a clear path forward.